by the light of the fire.
How could you think it was that bad?
Scootaloo exclaimed, flailing her hooves as she nearly fell off the log she was sitting on. For Scootaloo, camping Whitetail Woods with Rainbow Dash and her two closest friends and their sisters had become a nearly monthly excursion, and important practice for the annual Big Sister Little Sister camping trip to far-off places. Out in the wilderness, even if compared to the Everfree, Whitetail was hardly wild. Sleeping in tents under the stars, fishing, just for fun of course, roasting marshmallows and telling scary stories around the campfire made for some of the best memories she had, and probably would ever have, even if there was some disagreement about the quality of the after-dinner entertainment.
I ain't saying that it's bad, Scootaloo. I'm just saying it ain't no different from all the other stories she tells around the campfire,
Applejack said.
What are you talking about? My stories are totally different.
Rainbow fired back.
Yeah,
Scootaloo said in agreement. They were the only ones who looked convinced.
Rainbow, Applejack does have something of a point.
Rarity chimed in.
You do have a number of stories to tell, but at the heart of it, they really are mostly the same story when you reach the end of them. Well, it's not like any of you are bringing scary stories that are actually scary. The last time one of you tried it, I almost fell asleep.
Rainbow replied.
Oh, so you want a scare story? Tell you what, well, I got a scare story for you.
Applejack said sharply.
Yeah, and what's so great about your story?
Rainbow asked, arms folded across her chest.
Unlike yours, mine actually happened, for starters.
That grabbed everyone's attention. 5 pair of eyes now eagerly watched Applejack.
My ma told it to me,
She said.
a little bit before Bloom was born, and probably way before I was old enough to be hearing stories like this one. But now that I'm older, I know why she told it to me. 'Cause I needed to know.
A moment passed and then Rainbow spoke up.
Okay, so maybe I'm interested now. Make with the story,
She said. Applejack sighed and rolled her eyes.
Like I said, Ma told me this just before Apple Bloom was born, and it happened a couple seasons before Big Mac was born, not that long after she got Ma and Pa hitched. Pa was off out of town making deliveries to somewhere. Ma never said where, but I reckon that part ain't important. What was important was that she and Granny just finished supper, and had all the fine plates and whatnot out of the table to get washed, since they was having company the next day. Of course, this was back before the new kitchen sink. That's the one we got right now. That was the one that was put in. I never used the old one, but Max says it was ornery like you wouldn't believe, and had seen fit to stop working just as about they were to start. Yawn,
Rainbow said suddenly.
I thought this was supposed to be a scary story. I'm getting to it.
Applejack snapped. She took a moment to compose herself.
So, the sink sees fit to go on strike just before they start dishes, and Granny shares a few unkind words about it. Stay here, Pear Butter, I'll be right back, she says, and she's out the front door and circling round the side to get at the pump for the plumbing. I don't see any point in trying to get started, since she'll know Granny'll want things going a certain way, so she parks herself by one of the front windows and has herself a look out at the night. The window was open, and there was a breeze coming through, giving her a fine break from the heat, and that's when she smells it. Rotten eggs. Which she thinks is weird on account of she's never smelled anything like that on the acres before. Then it got worse. Like something that died. Got left in the sun. And she feels this tingle up her spine and the hairs all along it start to stand up. She calls out for Granny but doesn't get any reply. So she's afraid. That kind of deep fear that gets you when you know something ain't right, even when it looks like everything is. She's thinking of locking the door and goes to call Granny again, when she sees it, this shadow bounding over under the starlight towards the porch.
Applejack paused, then looked over back her shoulder briefly towards the trees at the edge of the clearing, and then back towards her audience.
What did she see?
Apple Bloom asked. Applejack sighed.
A monster,
She said.
Now, y'all know that it weren't ponies what lived in these lands first. Coyotes were here, and they had legends, old legends. Older than any of the older chiefs out west that they talk about in school. Older than the sisters. Older than any pony hooves built round here. Legends about the old Yote magic. About deals made with the spirits of power. Dark power. power to fight each other, and fight the buffalo when they got too near, and later to fight the ponies when they came to claim the lands for themselves.
Applejack paused again and looked at her audience, all of them leaning forward and watching her intently with her eyes open wide. Even Rainbow.
Skinwalkers is what they call them. Old warriors come back to life. They had no fur or skin on them, just sinew and muscle, tromping around on boar legs and back and deer legs in front, with an eagle's body and a yote's head. But it's all wrong. It's all wrong. 16 hooves, tall at the shoulder, even hunched over. Mouths full of 2-minute teeth, sharper than any knife you've ever seen. They'd gut their enemies. And the old ponies that first came here, and tear through a full-grown buffalo like there was a potato sack. Tricky, too. Changed their voice like a changeling, made them sound like some pony you know, or might know. That's what she saw. Big and fast, with 2 red eyes, running past the porch just outside the lot. Hooves clomping on the dirt before it stopped. Just for a second. Then it turned. Looked through the window right at her, right into her eyes, and she swore it grinned at her. Then, it was gone. She felt like there was a lightning in the air, like how it feels just before a bolt comes down from a cloud. She felt like death was close. Knew it was close. She tried yelling for Granny, but all that came out was a little squeak.
Applejack's audience was shaking now, even though they had to know how the story ended. Applejack was there to tell it, and Applebloom was there to listen, after all.
Skinwalker's real power, though. That was changing the skin. That's why the spirits took theirs away. So they could take it from others. Not ever for long, but long enough to do evil for the poor soul whose hide they took, came looking for it, and they went off to whatever was waiting for him on the other side. And Ma's standing there, just staring out the windows and shaking when the door opens, and she spins and grabs a plate off the table like it was a shield. Then it's just Granny that comes in. "Land's sakes, girl, it's just me," she says, and walks straight over to the sink and starts up the water. "Now hurry it up, got plenty to do yet if we're having company tomorrow." So, Ma starts collecting the plates off the table, just like she usually did, figuring it was Granny after all. "But, how did she know?"
Rainbow asked. She looked around the rest of the camping group, who were now looking at her, straightened herself up and coughed, and smiled in the smug way she often did.
I mean, I guess she knew, because Granny said something about company coming over. Right? No?
The smile fled from Rainbow's face, and all eyes moved back to Applejack.
When Ma carried over the first stack of plates, she looked out the window over the sink. You know the one. And there, just outside the lot, she sees that thing, watching her with them red eyes and grinning with too many sharp teeth, and she starts shaking and tries to get Granny's attention. And Granny? She just keeps her eyes down in the sink, washing dishes, and says, "Pear butter, don't look at it. Never look at it." That's how she knew.
Silence fell over the group, broken only by the crackle of the campfire.
"Well, I'm kind of feeling beat. Time to go to bed. Good night, every pony."
Rainbow said before she zipped into her tent.
"Yeah, what she said. Great idea. Good night.
Scootaloo added, zipping after her. The 4 ponies remaining looked after them for a moment before Rarity stood up.
"Yes, I do believe that the bed is in order. Amusing as Applejack's story was, it was equally ghastly. And I would rather not get worked up any more than I already am. Wouldn't you agree, Sweetie Belle?" she said. "Yeah, don't need to be worked up anymore,"
Sweetie said with a too bright smile before she shrunk down a little bit.
"But, maybe could we put a little bit more wood in the fire?" "Don't you worry, sweetie. I reckon Bloom and I can keep this fire burning until sunrise," Applejack replied. "Oh, good. Thanks, Applejack."
Sweetie hurried off to the tent she was sharing with Rarity, who was not too far off behind. And Applebloom couldn't help but think of the oversized luxury as somewhat and somehow more secure than the tiny one she and Applejack would be sharing. She didn't voice that thought, though, as Applejack added some more logs onto the fire, offset from the center and laid end on end so that they would be in sequence, instead of all at once, and then both retired to their own tent.
"Hey, Applejack?"
Applebloom asked as she pulled her sleeping bag open.
Yeah, Bloom?
Applejack asked, climbing into her own sleeping bag and setting her hat over her face.
There ain't really any skinwalkers, are there?
She asked. Applejack lifted her hat and raised her head long enough to look at her sister.
Bloom, it was just a story,
she said.
Ma swore it up and down that it happened, but you and me, we paid attention in school. Weren't no yotes around these parts, never was. These all out west.
Apple Bloom let out a heavy breath.
So, there ain't no skinwalkers out there?
She asked with some excitement. Applejack shook her head.
Ain't never seen no skinwalkers out there, if there was any to see at all,
she replied. Apple Bloom heaved a heavy sigh and smiled.
Thanks, Applejack. It was a great story, but next time maybe we can stick to some that, ain't so scary,
she suggested.
I think that'll do just fine, Bloom.
Applejack yawned, and then replaced her hat over her face and tucked down into her sleeping bag.
Night, little sis. Good night, big sis.
Apple Bloom replied, tucking into her own sleeping bag. She looked at the ceiling of their tent for just a few seconds, and then sat up with a start as she realized a very important detail she had at first missed in what Applejack said. She trembled, looking over through the narrow opening in tent canvas. Just beyond the light of their campfire, something with too many sharp teeth looked back at her, right into her wide eyes pinpricked by fear. And it grinned.